the scrawny mutt with the matted fur, and one ear torn nearly in half was watching her from beneath the wooden steps when Rose Lancaster set down the tin plate of scraps behind the Silver Spur Saloon. It was past midnight on a sweltering August evening in 1878, and the sounds of raucous laughter and piano music drifted through the walls as she knelt in the dirt, her plain cotton dress pooling around her knees. The dog approached cautiously, ribs showing through its mangy coat, and Rose felt her heart clench the way it always did when she saw creatures the world had forgotten. "Come on now," she whispered, pushing the plate closer. "Nobody is going to hurt you tonight." 3 more dogs emerged from the shadows, along with a tabby cat missing most of its tail. Rose had been coming out here every night for the past 2 months, ever since she had started working as a waitress at the Silver Spur. The owner, a gruff man named Walter Hastings, did not care what she did with the leftover food as long as she finished her shifts and kept the customers happy. Most of the scraps would have gone to the hogs anyway, so Rose figured she might as well put them to better use. She watched the animals eat, their desperate hunger evident in every gulp and snap of their jaws. This was the best part of her day, these quiet moments when the world seemed less cruel and she could pretend she was making some small difference. Her mother had passed 2 years ago from consumption, and her father had drunk himself to death 6 months after that, leaving Rose alone in Abilene with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. The saloon job kept her fed and paid for a tiny room above the general store, but it was moments like these that reminded her she still had a soul worth saving. The one-eared dog finished first and looked up at her with liquid brown eyes. Rose reached out slowly, letting him sniff her hand before she gently scratched behind his good ear. "You are a sweet boy, are not you?" she murmured. "Just needed someone to give you a chance." She did not hear the footsteps until a shadow fell across the alley. Rose jerked her head up, her hand instinctively going to the small knife she kept in her pocket. A man stood at the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the lamplight from the main street. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty Stetson and a gun belt that hung low on his hips. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried easily despite the noise from the saloon. "Did not mean to startle you." Rose stood quickly, brushing dirt from her skirt. The dogs scattered back into the shadows except for the one-eared mutt who stayed close to her legs. "Can I help you with something?" The man stepped forward into the sliver of moonlight that cut through the alley, and Rose could finally make out his features. He had a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, deep-set eyes that looked almost black in the darkness, and a weathered face that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with the kind of solid presence that came from hard work and harder living. "Name is Ethan Cole," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just rode into town this afternoon looking for work. Saw you from across the street and wondered what a lady was doing in an alley this time of night." "Feeding strays," Rose said shortly, not sure why she felt defensive. "Is that a problem?" Ethan shook his head, a hint of something that might have been a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, madam, just unusual is all. Most folks around here would sooner kick a stray than feed one." "Well, I am not most folks." Rose picked up the empty tin plate and held it against her chest like a shield. The one-eared dog pressed closer to her skirt, growling low in his throat. "I can see that." Ethan's gaze dropped to the dog, and his expression softened. "That one looks like he has been through hell and back." "They all have," Rose said quietly. "That is why they need help." Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then he nodded as if he had come to some kind of decision. "How many you been feeding?" I do not know exactly. 5 or 6 regulars, maybe more that come and go. Rose frowned. Why? Because they need more than just food, Ethan said, gesturing to the dog still hiding in the shadows. They need shelter, protection from the elements and from folks who would hurt them just for sport. Rose felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest, but she tamped it down. She had learned the hard way not to trust easily. And what business is that of yours? Maybe none, Ethan admitted. But I grew up on a ranch outside Fort Worth, and my ma used to take in every broken thing that crossed our property. Dogs, cats, even a 3-legged coyote once. Drove my pa half crazy, but she always said that how you treat the helpless says everything about your character. He paused, his eyes meeting hers directly. Seems to me you have got good character, Miss Lancaster. Rose blinked. How do you know my name? Asked around inside. Bartender pointed you out when you were carrying trays. Ethan shifted his weight, and Rose noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. I am staying at the boarding house down the street for now, but I have got some experience with carpentry. If you want, I could build a shelter for these animals. Nothing fancy, just something to keep them dry when it rains and give them a safe place to sleep. Why would you do that? Rose demanded, suspicion warring with hope. You do not even know me. Ethan looked away, his jaw working as if he was chewing on his words. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. Lost my horse 3 weeks back. Best damn animal I ever had. She stepped in a hole during a storm and broke her leg, and I had to put her down myself. He cleared his throat. Maybe I am just trying to balance the scales a bit. Do something good for creatures that need it. Rose studied his face in the dim light, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives. But all she saw was genuine grief and a bone-deep weariness that she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. I cannot pay you, she said finally. I barely make enough to keep myself fed. Did not ask for payment, Ethan replied. Just permission to use the space behind the saloon. I will talk to the owner tomorrow, make sure he is fine with it. Walter will not care as long as it does not interfere with business, Rose said slowly. She should have said no, should have sent this stranger on his way and continued handling things herself. But the thought of these animals having real shelter, a safe place to rest, was too tempting to resist. All right, if you really want to help, I will not stop you. Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, and this time he definitely smiled. I will get started tomorrow. Should not take more than a day or two if I can scrounge up the materials. There is a lot of scrap wood behind the livery stable, Rose offered. Old Jim threw out a bunch of broken fence posts last week. You could probably use those. Good to know. Ethan tipped his hat again. I will let you get back to your evening, Miss Lancaster. Thank you for trusting me. He turned to leave, but Rose found herself calling out, Rose, you can just call me Rose. Ethan glanced back over his shoulder, and even in the darkness she could see the warmth in his expression. Rose, then. Good night. Good night, Ethan Cole. She watched him walk away, disappearing into the flow of people still moving along the main street despite the late hour. The one-eared dog whined softly, and Rose looked down to find all the animals had crept back out of hiding, watching her expectantly. Well, she said to them, feeling a strange flutter in her chest that she had not experienced in years. I suppose we will see if he means what he says. The next morning, Rose woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, a faded blue calico that had been her mother's, and hurried downstairs from her tiny room. The general store was already open, with old Mrs. Chen arranging canned goods on the shelves and chattering to the early customers. Rose slipped out the back door and made her way down the dusty street toward the saloon, her heart beating faster than it should. When she rounded the corner into the alley behind the silver spur, she stopped short. Ethan was already there, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, his hat hanging from a nail on the saloon's back wall. He had cleared a space against the far wall of the alley and was methodically assembling what looked like the frame of a large wooden structure. A pile of salvaged lumber sat nearby, along with a toolbox and several buckets of nails. "You are early," Rose said, announcing her presence. Ethan looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Wanted to get started before the heat of the day set in. You heading to work?" "Not until this evening. I have the morning shift off." Rose moved closer, examining his work with growing amazement. "You have already done so much." "Not really, just the basic frame." Ethan picked up another board and positioned it carefully. "I talked to Walter before dawn when he was opening up. He said as long as I keep it tidy and do not block the back door, he has got no objections. Even said I could have some of the broken furniture in his storage room for extra wood." Rose felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You really meant it, about building them a shelter?" Ethan paused in his work, turning to face her fully. In the bright morning sunlight, she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. His eyes were actually a deep brown, almost the color of strong coffee, and there were lines around them that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. A scar ran along his left temple, partially hidden by his dark hair, and his hands were calloused and strong. "I always mean what I say," he said simply. "Learned a long time ago that your word is about all you have got in this world that is really worth anything." "That is a rare quality," Rose said softly. "Most men I have known were full of empty promises." "Then you have known the wrong men." Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them, before he returned to his hammering. Rose stood there, uncertain what to do with herself. She should have gone to help Mrs. Chen at the store or done her mending or any of the dozens of tasks that filled her days. Instead, she found herself asking, "Do you need any help?" Ethan glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You know anything about carpentry?" "Not really, but I can follow instructions." Rose pushed up her sleeves. "And I've got 2 working hands and nothing else to do until tonight." A slow grin spread across Ethan's face, transforming it completely. "All right then. Can you hold this board steady while I nail it in place?" They worked together through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Ethan would measure and cut the boards, and Rose would hold them in position while he secured them. He was patient when she made mistakes, showing her how to properly grip the wood or angle it for the best fit. As the sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, Rose fetched water from the pump behind the saloon, and they shared it from a tin cup, passing it back and forth without comment. The animals began to appear as the morning wore on, curious about the activity. The one-eared dog was the bravest, creeping close to sniff at the wood shavings and watch them work with intelligent eyes. A skinny orange tabby cat climbed onto a nearby barrel and surveyed the scene like an overseer. 2 more dogs, a rangy mutt with a white patch over one eye and a smaller brown dog with a crooked tail, settled in the shade to observe. "They are watching you," Rose said, smiling as she held a crossbeam in place. "Making sure I do a good job," Ethan replied, driving a nail home with 3 solid strikes. "Cannot disappoint my audience. You have much experience with building things." "Some. My pa taught me basic carpentry when I was a boy, said every man should know how to work with his hands." Ethan wiped his brow, leaving a streak of dirt across his temple. "Helped build a barn when I was 16, and I have done odd jobs here and there over the years. Nothing fancy, but I can make something that will stand." "What brings you to Abilene?" Rose asked, then immediately worried she was prying. "I am sorry, that is none of my business." "No, it is fine." Ethan set down his hammer and reached for the water cup, taking a long drink before answering. "I have been drifting since I left Fort Worth last year. Worked cattle drives, did some ranch handwork, even tried my hand at mining up in Colorado for a few months. Nothing stuck. Heard there might be work at some of the ranches around here, figured I would give it a try." "That sounds like a lonely life," Rose said quietly. "It has been," Ethan admitted. His eyes met hers, and there was a vulnerability in them that made her breath catch. "But maybe that is about to change." Before Rose could respond, the back door of the saloon swung open and Walter stepped out, his considerable belly straining against his stained apron. "Rose, I thought that was you out here. What are you doing?" "Helping," Rose said, straightening and brushing wood dust from her dress. "Is that a problem?" Walter squinted at the partially constructed shelter, then at Ethan. "Long as you show up for your shift on time, I do not care what you do with your free hours." He jerked his thumb back toward the saloon. "But since you are here, I could use a hand with inventory." "Got a big shipment that came in early." Rose felt a pang of disappointment but nodded. "Of course, I will be right there." She turned back to Ethan. "I have to go." "Go on," Ethan said, already reaching for another board. "I can handle the rest. Thanks for your help this morning." "Will you?" Rose hesitated, not wanting to seem too eager. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Ethan's expression softened. "If you want me to be." "I do," Rose said, and then blushed at how quickly the words came out. "I mean to finish the shelter for the animals." "I know what you meant." But Ethan's slight smile suggested he knew more than that. "I will be here." Rose hurried inside, her heart doing strange acrobatics in her chest. She spent the rest of the day counting bottles of whiskey and kegs of beer. But her mind kept drifting to the man in the alley, the sound of his hammer, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. That evening, after her shift ended well past midnight, Rose carried out her usual bucket of scraps. The shelter was not finished yet, but it had taken solid shape. A sturdy wooden structure roughly 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall, with an angled roof to shed rain and an open front that would allow the animals to come and go freely. The one-eared dog was already inside, curled up in the corner as if claiming his spot, and Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "You did good, boy," she whispered, setting down the food. "You found yourself a home." Over the next 3 days, Rose spent every free moment in the alley with Ethan. He worked steadily, adding walls and reinforcing joints, even creating small dividers inside so the animals could have separate spaces if they wanted. Rose helped where she could, but mostly she found herself just talking to him, sharing stories of her childhood and her parents, asking about his life on the road. Ethan, she learned, was 29 years old, 3 years older than her own 26. He had left home after his mother died of fever, unable to bear the emptiness of the ranch without her gentle presence. His father had remarried within 6 months, and Ethan and his stepmother had never gotten along. He had 2 younger sisters who were married and settled now, both with children he had never met. "You miss them?" Rose asked on the 3rd afternoon, as they sat in the shade sharing a lunch of bread and cheese she had brought from the general store. "Sometimes," Ethan said, staring out at the dusty street visible at the end of the alley. "But I think I was running from something more than running to anything, you know. After Ma died, everything that mattered just seemed to go with her. Pa changed. The ranch changed. I did not fit there anymore." "I understand that," Rose said softly. "After my parents died, this town felt like a ghost place. Every corner had memories, but none of them were happy ones anymore, just reminders of what I had lost." Ethan turned to look at her, and the understanding in his eyes made her chest ache. Why did you stay? Where else would I go? Rose shrugged. I had no money, no family, no prospects. At least here I had work and a roof over my head. It seemed safer than striking out alone. Safe is not always the same as living, Ethan observed. No, Rose agreed. But sometimes surviving is enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the animals explore their new shelter. More strays had appeared over the past few days, drawn by the smell of food and the presence of other creatures. There were now at least 8 dogs of various sizes and breeds, plus 3 cats and what appeared to be a young opossum that Rose suspected was not entirely wild. You have built them a whole community, Rose said, smiling as 2 of the dogs' play wrestled in the shade. Look how much happier they are already. They just needed someone to care, Ethan said. He looked at her sidelong, his expression thoughtful. Same as people, I suppose. Rose felt heat creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. I suppose so. That evening, Ethan declared the shelter officially complete. He had even added a water trough on one side, fed by a pipe he had rigged from the saloon's rain barrel, and a small storage box for the food scraps Rose brought each night. The animals seemed to sense something special was happening, gathering around as Ethan made his final adjustments. There, he said, stepping back to survey his work with satisfaction. Should hold up through anything short of a tornado. Rose walked around the structure, marveling at the craftsmanship. It was simple but solid, every joint fitted with care, every board placed with purpose. It is wonderful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Truly, Ethan, this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done. I did not do it for thanks, Ethan said, but he looked pleased nonetheless. Besides, you are the one who was taking care of them in the first place. I just gave them walls. Rose turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed by gratitude and something deeper, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing them, for seeing me. Ethan's hand tightened around hers and he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, smell the scent of sawdust and honest sweat that clung to his shirt. Rose, he said, his voice low and rough. These past few days, getting to know you, working beside you, I have not felt this settled in years. Like maybe I have been drifting because I was looking for something, and I just did not know what it was until I found it. Rose's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Ethan, I know it is fast, he continued, not letting her finish. I know we have only known each other a few days and you have got every reason to be cautious. But I have learned that sometimes you just know when something is right, when someone is right. And you feel right to me, Rose Lancaster. Like every step I have taken for the past year was leading me to this alley to you. Rose could barely breathe. Every instinct told her to protect herself, to hold back, to remember all the ways life had hurt her before. But when she looked into Ethan's eyes, all she saw was honesty and hope and a tenderness that made her want to take the risk. You feel right to me too, she whispered, and that terrifies me. Ethan lifted his free hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite care. We will take it slow, he promised. I am not going anywhere, Rose, not unless you tell me to go. I do not want you to go, Rose said, leaning into his touch. I want you to stay. Then I will stay. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Rose rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was soft and sweet, a gentle promise rather than a demand. His lips were warm against hers, tasting of coffee and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, Rose felt like something fundamental had shifted in her world. The one-eared dog barked once from inside the shelter, breaking the moment, and they both laughed. "I think he approves," Ethan said, grinning. "He has good taste," Rose replied, feeling lighter than she had in years. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Rose fell into a pattern that felt as natural as breathing. He found work at her ranch 5 miles outside town, breaking horses and mending fences, but he came into Abilene every evening to help Rose feed the animals and spend time with her. Sometimes they would sit behind the saloon talking until the stars wheeled overhead and the town fell silent. Other times they would walk along the creek that ran west of town, away from the noise and the dust, and Ethan would pick wildflowers to tuck behind her ear. Rose had never been courted before, not properly, and she was constantly surprised by the little gestures that showed Ethan's thoughtfulness. He brought her ribbons in colors that matched her eyes. He repaired the broken step leading to her room above the general store without being asked. Once, when she mentioned her mother's battered Bible was falling apart, he spent a week carefully rebinding it with leather and returned it to her with such pride that Rose had cried. The people of Abilene began to notice their growing attachment, and opinions were mixed. Walter approved, claiming that Rose seemed happier and worked better when she was not so grim-faced all the time. Mrs. Chen at the general store liked Ethan because he always tipped his hat politely and helped carry heavy boxes when he saw her struggling. But there were others who whispered that Rose was foolish to trust a drifter, that Ethan would tire of her and leave just like all men did, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak. Rose tried not to listen to the gossip, but it was hard when she was serving drinks and heard the muttered comments from the saloon girls and the ranchers who came in for poker games. One night, a regular customer named Frank Doyle had too much whiskey and made a crude comment about what Ethan was really after from Rose. Before she could respond, Ethan appeared beside her, his expression cold and dangerous. "You will apologize to the lady," Ethan said quietly, his hand resting on the back of Rose's chair. Frank sneered. "Or what, drifter? You will shoot me. We all know your type. Here today, gone tomorrow, leaving broken hearts and empty promises." "My promises are not empty," Ethan said, and there was steel in his voice now. "And Rose deserves more respect than you are showing, so I will ask you one more time politely. Apologize." The saloon had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Frank stood slowly, his hand drifting toward his belt, and Rose felt ice flood her veins. But Walter stepped forward, his considerable bulk placing itself between the two men. "Frank, you have had enough for tonight," Walter said firmly. "Settle your tab and head home. And if you cannot be respectful to my staff, you can find another place to drink." Frank glared at them all but threw some coins on the table and stomped out, slamming the door behind him. The normal noise of the saloon gradually resumed, and Ethan turned to Rose, his anger fading into concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, taking her hand. "I am fine," Rose said, though she was shaking slightly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Ethan's jaw was tight. "Nobody talks about you that way, not while I am around to stop it." Rose felt warmth bloom in her chest despite the lingering tension. "My hero," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "Always," Ethan replied, and she believed him. 2 months after they met, Ethan asked Rose to come to the ranch where he worked. "I want you to see what I do," he explained. "Meet the people I work with. See if you can picture yourself being part of that life." Rose's hands trembled as she climbed into the wagon he had borrowed for the trip. The implication was clear. Ethan was thinking about a future, a permanent one, and he wanted her to be part of it. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. The Circle C Ranch was a sprawling operation owned by a weathered cattleman named Charles Morrison and his wife Patricia. They greeted Rose warmly, and Patricia immediately pulled her aside for tea while Ethan went to check on the horses. "He talks about you constantly," Patricia said, pouring steaming liquid into delicate china cups that seemed incongruous with the rough ranch house. "Rose this, Rose that. I swear that boy is head over heels." Rose blushed. "He is a good man. The best," Patricia agreed. "Charles says he is the finest hand we have had in years. Honest, hard-working, good with the animals, and he has been saving every penny he earns. I suspect I know why." Rose's blush deepened, but she could not help the smile that tugged at her lips. "We have not talked about anything permanent yet." "Give him time," Patricia said kindly. "Some men need to have everything perfect before they can ask the important questions. But trust me, dear. When a man looks at you the way Ethan looks at you, the question is not if but when." They spent the afternoon at the ranch, and Rose watched Ethan work with a horse that had been mistreated by its previous owner. He was patient and gentle, speaking in low tones, never forcing the animal but earning its trust bit by bit. The horse, a beautiful bay mare with scared eyes, gradually relaxed under his touch, and by the time the sun was setting, she was eating carrots from his hand. "You have a gift," Rose said as they drove back toward Abilene in the wagon, the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Just patience," Ethan said. "Everything worth having takes time and care. You cannot force trust. You have to earn it." Rose leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady warmth of him through his shirt. "You have earned mine," she said quietly. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop on a hill overlooking the town, the lights of Abilene twinkling like earthbound stars in the distance. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Rose, I need to tell you something." Her heart started to race. "What is it?" "I love you," Ethan said simply. "I have loved you since that first night when I saw you in the alley, caring for creatures that nobody else would even look at. You have the biggest heart of anyone I have ever met, and you make me want to be a better man. I know it has not been long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Rose felt tears stream down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been so scared to say it, scared to believe it could be real, but I do. I love you, Ethan Cole." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Rose felt like she was flying, soaring above all the pain and loss that had defined her life for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," he said. "I know I should wait, do this proper with a ring and everything, but I cannot hold it in anymore. Will you marry me, Rose Lancaster? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Rose laughed through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. The horse snorted in protest at the commotion, and they collapsed against each other, giddy with happiness. "I will get you a proper ring," Ethan promised. "Something beautiful like you deserve." "I do not need a ring," Rose said. "I just need you." "You will have both," Ethan insisted. "You will have everything I can possibly give you, Rose. I promise you that." They were married 4 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Abilene. Rose wore a dress that Patricia Morrison had helped her sew, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar. Ethan wore his best shirt and a new vest he had saved up for, his hair slicked back and his face shaved smooth. Walter gave Rose away, grumbling about losing his best waitress, but secretly delighted for her. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony, and half the town turned out to watch. The ring Ethan slipped on her finger was a thin gold band with a small emerald, her birthstone. "It is not much," he whispered as they exchanged vows. "It is perfect," Rose whispered back. They held the reception behind the saloon, naturally, with the animal shelter as a backdrop. Someone had decorated it with ribbons and wildflowers, and the animals themselves seemed to sense the celebration, lounging peacefully in the late September sunshine. There was food and music and dancing, and Rose felt like her heart might burst from happiness. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Rose and Ethan stood together looking at the shelter that had brought them together. The one-eared dog who Rose had named Courage lay at their feet, his tail thumping contentedly. "Thank you," Rose said softly, "for building this, for seeing me, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Ethan replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder, "for showing me what home feels like." They had rented a small house on the outskirts of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Ethan continued working at the Circle C ranch, and Rose kept her job at the saloon for a few more months, until they had saved enough money to feel secure. Every evening they still came together to feed the strays behind the Silver Spur, and the shelter became known throughout Abilene as a safe place for lost and forgotten animals. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, and there were times when Rose worried about how they would make ends meet. Ethan's old leg injury, a souvenir from a horse kick years ago, sometimes flared up during the winter cold, leaving him in pain and unable to work for days at a time. They argued occasionally, usually about small things blown out of proportion by stress and exhaustion, but they always made up before going to sleep, honoring the promise they had made to never let the sun set on their anger. But the love between them only grew stronger. Ethan would surprise Rose with small gifts, wildflowers picked on his way home from work, or a new book he had traded for at the general store. Rose learned to cook his favorite meals, experimenting with recipes, until she perfected the beef stew that reminded him of his mother's cooking. They took long walks in the evenings, talking about their dreams and fears, building a foundation of trust and intimacy that went far deeper than the physical. In the spring of 1879, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had been too nervous to say anything, worried about jinxing it or raising hopes too soon. But when she finally told Ethan, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time, then gently set her down and dropped to his knees to kiss her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Rose, we are going to have a baby." "We are," Rose confirmed, running her fingers through his hair and feeling overwhelmed by love for this man who had changed her entire world. The pregnancy was not easy. Rose suffered from terrible morning sickness through the first few months, and by summer the heat made her miserable and swollen. Ethan was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water and fanning her with newspapers, rubbing her aching back and feet, doing everything he could to ease her discomfort. Patricia Morrison took Rose under her wing, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from when her own children were small. In October, as the leaves were turning gold and red, and the oppressive heat finally broke, Rose went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Ethan was terrified he might lose her. But Rose was strong, stronger than she looked, and just before dawn on October 15th, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel Charles, Samuel for Rose's father and Charles for Ethan's employer and friend. He had a tuft of dark hair like his father and bright blue eyes that would eventually turn brown. Ethan held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from the baby to Rose and back again. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "You are perfect. "Thank you, Rose. Thank you for giving me a family." Rose was exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "We made him together," she said softly. "This is our family, Ethan. Yours and mine and his." Samuel was a good baby, easy-tempered and quick to smile. Ethan was a devoted father, insisting on taking night feedings when he could so Rose could rest, walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough but gentle voice. Rose would wake sometimes in the night to find Ethan sitting in the rocking chair with their son, just watching him sleep with an expression of such pure love that it made her heart ache. The animals at the shelter seemed to sense the new addition to the family. Courage, the one-eared dog who had been there from the beginning, appointed himself Samuel's guardian, lying beside the baby's cradle and growling if anyone other than Ethan or Rose came too close. The cats would curl up near the rocking chair when Rose nursed, purring their own lullabies. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, he developed his mother's compassion for animals and his father's steady temperament. By the time he was 2 years old, he would toddle out to the shelter with his parents every evening, carefully carrying a small bucket of scraps that Ethan had prepared for him, gravely doling out food to each animal like a tiny philanthropist. In 1881, Charles Morrison offered Ethan the position of foreman at the Circle C Ranch. It came with a significant raise in pay and a small house on the ranch property, much larger than their current home. Ethan and Rose discussed it at length, weighing the benefits against the fact that it would mean moving away from Abilene and the shelter they had built. "The animals will be fine," Rose said finally. "Walter has agreed to keep feeding them, and several other people in town have started helping. Our shelter has inspired them to care too, but this is an amazing opportunity for us, for Samuel. I think we should take it." "Are you sure?" Ethan asked. "I know how much that shelter means to you." "It does mean a lot," Rose admitted. "But you mean more. Our family means more. And besides," she added with a smile, "I am sure there are strays at the ranch who could use some looking after." They moved to the Circle C in the spring, and Rose was right. Within a month, she had established a new feeding station for the barn cats and ranch dogs, and Ethan had built another shelter, this one even larger than the first. Patricia Morrison became Rose's close friend, and the two women spent many afternoons together, sewing and talking while Samuel played with Patricia's grandchildren when they visited. Ethan thrived in his new role as foreman. He was respected by the ranch hands for his fairness and skill, and Charles came to rely on his judgment in all matters related to the cattle and horses. The additional income allowed them to save money for the first time in their marriage, building a nest egg for Samuel's future and any other children they might have. In 1882, Rose gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Grace, named for both their grandmothers. The delivery was even harder than Samuel's had been, and the doctor warned that Rose should not have more children, that another pregnancy might be dangerous. Ethan, terrified at the thought of losing her, agreed immediately. "3 is perfect," he said, holding his new daughters with practiced ease. "3 is more than I ever dreamed I would have." The twins were identical in appearance but different in temperament. Alina was bold and adventurous, always trying to climb things and explore, while Grace was quieter and more thoughtful, content to sit and observe before joining in. Samuel adored his little sisters, helping Rose care for them with all the seriousness of his 4 years. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The years passed peacefully, marked by small joys and the occasional challenge. There were droughts that tested the ranch, and harsh winters that took their toll on the livestock, but the Cole family weathered them together. Ethan taught Samuel to ride when he turned 5, and the boy took to horses as naturally as breathing, clearly inheriting his father's gift with animals. The twins learned to walk and talk, then to run and argue and make their parents laugh with their antics. In 1885, when Samuel was 6 and the twins were 3, disaster struck. A fire started in the main barn at the Circle C, cause unknown, and spread with terrifying speed. Ethan was in town buying supplies when it happened, and Rose was at the house with the children. By the time word reached her, half the barn was engulfed, with horses screaming inside and ranch hands desperately trying to free them. Rose did not hesitate. She told Samuel to watch his sisters and ran toward the flames, joining the bucket brigade that was trying to contain the fire. The smoke was thick and choking, and the heat was incredible, but Rose kept working, passing bucket after bucket, her dress soaked with water and ash. One of the young ranch hands, a boy barely 18, suddenly cried out that there was still a horse trapped in the back stall. Before anyone could stop him, he ran into the burning barn. Rose heard the ominous creak of timbers and knew the roof was about to collapse. Without thinking, she followed him in, calling his name. She found him struggling with a panicked mare, the smoke so thick she could barely see. Together they managed to get the horse free and were heading toward the door when a burning beam fell directly in front of them. Rose shoved the young man and the horse through the gap, but there was not room for her to follow before more debris crashed down, cutting off her escape. She was trapped, coughing violently, the smoke filling her lungs. Her eyes stung and watered, and she could feel the heat of the flames all around her. This is it, she thought with strange clarity. This is how I die. And all she could think about was Ethan and the children, how devastated they would be. How she would never get to see Samuel grow up or watch the twins become young women. Then, through the smoke and flames, she heard Ethan's voice, bellowing her name with raw terror. She tried to call back but could only cough. Suddenly he was there, materializing through the smoke like an avenging angel, his shirt wrapped around his mouth and nose, his eyes wild when they found her. "Hold on," he shouted, lifting a burning beam with strength born of desperation. "Come on, Rose, move." She scrambled under the beam, and Ethan grabbed her, half carrying and half dragging her toward where he had come in. The barn was collapsing around them, the roar of the fire deafening. They burst out into the open air just as the entire structure gave way behind them, collapsing in a shower of sparks and burning timber. They fell to the ground together, both gasping and coughing. Someone threw blankets over them, beating out embers that had caught on their clothes. Rose's lungs felt like they were on fire, and every breath was agony, but she was alive. Ethan was alive. They were both alive. When she could finally breathe again, she looked up to find Ethan staring at her with an expression of such fierce emotion that it took her breath away all over again. "Do not ever do that again," he said hoarsely. "Do you hear me, Rose? Never. I cannot lose you. I cannot." "I am sorry," Rose whispered, her voice raspy from smoke. "There was a boy and a horse." "I know." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight it almost hurt. "I know. And I love that about you, your brave, foolish, beautiful heart. But please, Rose, please be more careful. Our children need you. I need you." "I need you too," Rose said, clinging to him. "I was so scared. I thought I would never see you again." They held each other while the barn burned itself out behind them, while the ranch hands worked to save what they could, while Samuel kept the twins safely away in the house. When Patricia finally convinced them to come inside and let the doctor look at them, they were still holding hands, neither willing to let go. The fire had been caused by a lantern knocked over by one of the horses, the subsequent investigation revealed. The barn was a total loss, but all the animals had survived, thanks to the quick actions of the ranch hands and Rose's bravery. The young man she had helped save came to visit her the next day, tears in his eyes as he thanked her for saving his life. "You did the right thing," Rose told him gently. "That horse needed help and you gave it to her. That takes courage. You are the brave one," he insisted. "I will never forget what you did for me." Rose recovered from the smoke inhalation, though her lungs remained sensitive for months afterward. Ethan was more shaken than she was, his fear of losing her manifesting in protective hovering that drove Rose half crazy even as it warmed her heart. He made her promise to never take such risks again, and she agreed, not because she did not think she had done the right thing, but because she understood his fear. If their positions had been reversed, if she had seen him run into a burning building, she would have been just as terrified. The incident brought them even closer together, if that was possible. They had always been affectionate, but now they seemed unable to be apart for long, as if reassuring themselves constantly that the other was still there, still alive, still theirs. The children, too young to fully understand what had happened but old enough to sense the tension, became more clingy for a while, and the Cole family spent many evenings simply cuddled together on the couch, reading stories and soaking in each other's presence. Charles Morrison, shaken by how close he had come to losing his foreman and Rose, insisted on building a new barn with the latest safety features, including multiple exits and better ventilation. He also gave Ethan a substantial bonus and a week off to spend with his family. Ethan and Rose used the time to take the children on a trip to San Antonio, showing them the missions and the river, making memories that would last a lifetime. As the 1880s progressed, the Cole family continued to grow and flourish, not in size but in bonds and love. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, kind-hearted boy who inherited his mother's compassion and his father's way with horses. By the time he was 10, he was already helping Ethan with the ranch work, proving himself capable and responsible beyond his years. The twins, Alina and Grace, were inseparable despite their different personalities. Alina was the adventurer, always wanting to explore and try new things, while Grace was the peacemaker, smoothing over conflicts and bringing harmony to difficult situations. Together they were a force to be reckoned with, charming everyone they met. In 1887, when Samuel was 8 and the twins were 5, Patricia Morrison passed away peacefully in her sleep. Charles was devastated, and Rose stepped in to help, organizing meals and support from the other ranch families, sitting with Charles through the long evenings when his grief was overwhelming. Ethan worried she was taking on too much, but Rose insisted. "Patricia was my friend," she said firmly. "She helped me when I needed it, taught me so much about being a wife and mother. This is the least I can do." Charles never remarried, instead throwing himself into the ranch work with renewed vigor. He and Ethan became even closer, and Charles began talking about eventually passing the ranch down to Ethan, or perhaps to Samuel when he was old enough. "You are like a son to me," he told Ethan one evening. "You and Rose and the children, you are my family now." The Cole family's shelter for stray animals became legendary in the area. People would bring injured or abandoned creatures from miles around, knowing they would find care and kindness. Samuel took a particular interest in healing wounded animals, and Rose taught him everything she had learned over the years about treating common injuries and illnesses. By the time he was 12, he was talking about maybe becoming a veterinarian, if they could afford the schooling. "We will make it work," Ethan promised. "Whatever you want to do, son, we will find a way." In 1890, when Rose was 38 and Ethan was 41, Charles Morrison suffered a stroke. He survived but was left partially paralyzed and unable to manage the ranch. True to his word, he signed over ownership of the Circle C to Ethan, with the stipulation that he could continue living in the main house for as long as he wished. "It is yours," Charles said, his speech slightly slurred but his eyes clear. "You have earned it 100 times over. Take care of her, Ethan. Take care of this land and these animals and make something beautiful." "I will," Ethan promised, gripping the old man's hand. "I swear it." Becoming a ranch owner was a huge responsibility, but Ethan was ready for it. He had been running the day-to-day operations for years, and the transition was smooth. Rose took on more responsibilities as well, managing the household accounts and overseeing the ranch kitchen that fed all the hands. Together, they made the Circle C more successful than it had ever been, treating their employees fairly and building a reputation for quality cattle and horses. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. In 1892, Charles Morrison passed away quietly, with Ethan and Rose at his bedside. They buried him next to Patricia, and Samuel, now 13, read a psalm at the funeral with a steady voice that made his parents proud. Samuel did indeed pursue veterinary medicine, attending school in Austin with financial help from his parents, and a scholarship he earned through academic excellence. He came home during summers to practice his skills on the ranch, and Rose loved watching her son work with the same gentle competence his father had always shown with animals. The twins grew into beautiful young women, Eleanor becoming a skilled rider and ranch hand in her own right, while Grace discovered a talent for painting, creating beautiful landscapes of the Texas countryside that Rose had framed and hung throughout the house. In 1898, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Rose back to Abilene for the first time in years. The town had changed, grown larger and more modern, but the Silver Spur Saloon was still standing. Walter had passed on, but his daughter had taken over, and she remembered Rose with great fondness. They walked around back to the alley where they had first met, and Rose was amazed to see the shelter still standing, weathered but intact, still housing strays that local volunteers cared for. Someone had put up a small plaque that read, "Built with love by Ethan Cole for his wife Rose, 1878. May kindness always find a home here." Rose burst into tears at the sight, and Ethan pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "20 years," he murmured. "Best 20 years of my life." "Mine too," Rose said, wiping her eyes. "I love you so much, Ethan. Thank you for seeing me that night. Thank you for building that shelter. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Ethan replied and kissed her deeply, right there in the alley where their story had begun. They spent the night in Abilene's new hotel, and Ethan made love to Rose with the same passion and tenderness he had shown her on their wedding night, proving that time had not dimmed their desire for each other. They talked until dawn about their life together, remembering the hard times and the good times, marveling at how far they had come from that first meeting behind a saloon. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked as the sun began to rise, casting golden light through the hotel window. "Giving up the drifting life, settling down with me." Ethan propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with those warm brown eyes that still made her heart skip. "Not for 1 second," he said firmly. "You gave me a home, Rose. Not just a house, but a real home with love and family and purpose. You gave me everything that matters." "You gave me the same," Rose said softly. "I was just surviving before you. You taught me how to live." As the new century approached, the Cole family faced the future with confidence and love. Samuel graduated from veterinary school at the top of his class and opened a practice in a nearby town, though he still came home regularly to help with the ranch animals. Eleanor shocked everyone by falling in love with a banker's son from Dallas, a quiet young man who adored her wild spirit, and they married in the spring of 1900 in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Grace took longer to find her match, but when she did, it was with a traveling artist who shared her passion for capturing the beauty of the world on canvas. Ethan and Rose became grandparents in 1901, when Eleanor gave birth to a son. Holding his grandson for the first time, Ethan had tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "A family, a legacy, people to carry on after I am gone. And it all started because you were kind enough to feed some stray dogs." "It started because you cared enough to build them shelter," Rose corrected gently. "We did this together, Ethan. Everything we have, we built together." In 1902, at the ages of 50 and 53 respectively, Rose and Ethan took stock of their life. The ranch was thriving under Ethan's management, now being assisted by Samuel, who was learning the business side while still maintaining his veterinary practice. Eleanor had given them 2 grandchildren, and Grace was expecting her first. The animal shelter on the ranch had expanded to include a small veterinary clinic, where Samuel treated animals for free if their owners could not afford his regular fees. On a warm evening in June, Rose and Ethan sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Courage, the one-eared dog who had been there from the beginning, had passed away years ago, but his descendants roamed the ranch, beloved companions to the family and workers alike. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, taking Rose's hand in his weathered one. Rose looked at her husband, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling, at the strength still evident in his frame despite the passing years. She thought about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch they had built, about the countless animals they had saved, about the life they had created from nothing but love and determination. "I am more than happy," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "I am blessed. I am loved. I am home." Ethan kissed the top of her head, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them that first night in the alley behind the saloon, when a cowboy had noticed a woman feeding strays and decided to build them something better. It had started with shelter for forgotten animals, but it had become so much more. It had become a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told and retold in the Cole family for generations to come. The story of how kindness had built a foundation, how compassion had created a community, and how love, real and true and lasting, had transformed 2 lonely souls into something magnificent. As Rose and Ethan grew older, they never forgot those humble beginnings. The anniversary of the day they met became a special holiday in their family, and every year they would gather everyone together and tell the story again, about the woman who fed strays and the cowboy who built them shelter, and how that simple act of caring had changed everything. In 1910, when Ethan was 61 and starting to slow down from a lifetime of hard work, he developed pneumonia during a harsh winter. Rose nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had shown throughout their marriage, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to let him slip away. Ethan recovered, thanks to her care and stubbornness, and he told everyone who would listen that Rose Lancaster Cole was the strongest woman he had ever known. "She is also the most beautiful, the kindest, and the best thing that ever happened to me," he would add, making Rose blush even after 3 decades of marriage. They celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary in 1913 with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them. Samuel had taken over most of the ranch management now, allowing Ethan to finally slow down and enjoy his later years. Eleanor had 4 children, all grown or nearly so, and Grace had 3, including a daughter with her mother's artistic talent and her grandmother's compassionate heart. At the celebration, Samuel stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "who taught us that kindness matters, that family is everything, and that love can build miracles. Everything good in my life comes from their example." "Hear, hear," everyone chorused, and Rose saw Ethan wipe tears from his eyes. That night, lying in bed together as they had done for 35 years, Rose traced the lines of Ethan's face with gentle fingers. "We did all right, did not we?" she asked softly. "We did better than all right," Ethan replied, catching her hand and kissing her palm. "We did extraordinary, and I would do it all over again, Rose. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as it was with you." "And I with you," Rose whispered. "Always with you." The years that followed were peaceful and full of love. Ethan and Rose spent their days working in the garden Rose had cultivated, tending to the few special animals that still captured their attention, and spoiling their grandchildren and great-grandchildren who began to arrive as the teens rolled into the 20s. In 1918, when the Spanish flu swept through Texas, the Cole family worked tirelessly to help their community. Samuel used his medical knowledge to assist the local doctor, while Eleanor and Grace organized supply drives and care for those affected. Rose, despite being 66 and not as strong as she once was, insisted on helping prepare meals and comfort the sick. Ethan tried to make her rest, but she was as stubborn as ever. "We take care of our own," she said firmly. "That is what you taught me, Ethan Cole, when you built that shelter all those years ago. When someone needs help, you do not turn away." By the grace of God, none of the immediate Cole family contracted the illness, though several of the ranch hands did. Rose and Ethan nursed them through it personally, and all recovered, strengthening the bond between the family and their employees even further. In 1923, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. Ethan was 74 now, his once dark hair pure white, his body bent with age but his eyes still bright with love when he looked at Rose. She was 71, her own hair silver, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but she still moved with purpose and determination, still cared for every stray that crossed her path, still loved her husband with the same fierce intensity she had felt as a young woman. 45 years, Ethan marveled as they sat together on the porch, their favorite spot, watching another Texas sunset. "How did we get so lucky, Rose?" "I do not think it was luck," Rose said thoughtfully. "I think it was choice. Every day we chose each other, we chose love, we chose kindness. And those choices built everything we have." "Wise words from a wise woman," Ethan said, squeezing her hand gently. "I learned from the best," Rose replied, squeezing back. Samuel approached the porch, now a distinguished man of 44 with his own silver threading through his hair. "Ma, there is someone here to see you. Says he has driven all the way from Abilene." Curious, Rose and Ethan made their way inside, where a young man in his 20s waited nervously in the parlor. He stood when they entered, hat in hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "Mr. and Mrs. Cole?" he asked. "I am Thomas Baker. I do not expect you to remember me, but 20 years ago you saved my life." Ethan and Rose exchanged glances. "During the fire?" Ethan asked. "Yes, sir. I was the fool kid who ran into the barn after that horse. Mrs. Cole came in after me and got me out." Thomas's voice shook. "I never properly thanked you. I was young and scared and I left the area soon after, but I have never forgotten what you did." You risked your life for mine, and I just wanted you to know that I have tried to live in a way that honors that sacrifice. I became a teacher, and I spend my life trying to help young people the way you helped me. I am married now, with 2 children, and I tell them all the time about the brave woman who saved me and the man who saved her." Rose felt tears well in her eyes. "You did not need to come all this way," she said gently. "Yes, I did," Thomas insisted. "I needed you to know that your kindness mattered, that it rippled out further than you could ever imagine. Because of you, I am alive. Because of you, my children exist. Because of you, hundreds of students have had a teacher who cares about them. Your compassion changed everything, Mrs. Cole." After Thomas left, having stayed for dinner and shared stories of his life, Rose cried in Ethan's arms. "I had forgotten about that day," she admitted. "Or tried to forget because it was so frightening. But look what came of it," Ethan said softly. "That young man, his family, all those students. You touched so many lives, Rose. That has always been your gift." "Our gift," Rose corrected. "We did it together. Everything together." In 1926, as they approached their 50th wedding anniversary, Ethan's health began to decline more noticeably. He had trouble catching his breath, and his heart would flutter irregularly. The doctor said it was simply age, the wearing out of a body that had worked hard for 7 decades. Ethan accepted it with grace, but Rose railed against it, wanting more time, more years, more sunsets with the man she loved. "We have had a good run," Ethan told her one evening, his voice weaker than it used to be. 50 years, Rose. 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and counting the great-grands now. We built something beautiful." "It is not enough," Rose said fiercely, holding his hand. "It will never be enough. I want forever with you." "You will have it," Ethan promised, "because love does not end, Rose. Not real love like ours. It goes on in our children, in the lives we touched, in every act of kindness that ripples out from the choices we made. We are not ending. We are just changing form." Their 50th anniversary celebration in September 1928 was a grand affair, with nearly 100 people in attendance. The entire Cole family gathered, along with ranch hands past and present, people from the community whose lives had been touched by Ethan and Rose's kindness, and representatives from several animal welfare organizations that had been inspired by their work. The governor of Texas sent a letter of commendation, praising their contributions to the state and their community. The local newspaper ran a full-page story about their love story and their legacy. But the moment Rose treasured most was when Ethan stood, leaning heavily on his cane, and looked around at all the faces gathered to celebrate with them. 50 years ago," he said, his voice still carrying despite his age, "I was a drifter with nothing to my name but a horse and a saddle. I was lost, looking for something I could not name. And then I saw this woman," he gestured to Rose, "feeding stray dogs in an alley behind a saloon, and I knew I had found what I was looking for. I had found home." He turned to face Rose directly, his eyes shining with tears and love. "You gave me everything, Rose Lancaster Cole. You gave me purpose, family, joy, a reason to wake up every morning and be better than I was the day before. You taught me that kindness is not weakness, that compassion is strength, and that love is the only thing that really matters in the end. I have loved you for 50 years, and I will love you for 50 more in this life or the next." There was not a dry eye in the room as Rose stood and embraced her husband, both of them crying, both of them overwhelmed by the weight of all those years, all that love, all that life they had built together. "You built me shelter," Rose whispered against his chest. "And then you became my shelter, my home, my everything. I love you, Ethan Cole, today, tomorrow, and forever." As autumn turned to winter in 1928, Ethan grew weaker. He spent most of his days in a chair on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the land he had worked for so many years. Rose was always beside him, holding his hand, reading to him, or simply sitting in companionable silence the way they had done for 5 decades. On a cold December evening, with Rose beside him and their children gathered around, Ethan Cole took his last breath. He went peacefully, a slight smile on his lips, Rose's hand clasped in his. His final words were, "Thank you for everything, my Rose, wait for me." "Always," Rose whispered through her tears. "I will always wait for you." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the life Ethan had lived and the hearts he had touched. They buried him on a hill overlooking the Circle C ranch, with a view of the land he had loved and cultivated. The headstone reads simply, "Ethan Cole, 1849–1928. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built shelter with his hands and home with his heart." Rose thought her own heart might break from the loss. After 50 years of marriage, of partnership, of love, she felt like half of herself was missing. But she was still strong, still determined, and she knew Ethan would want her to keep living, keep loving, keep caring for the creatures and people who needed her. She continued working with the animal sanctuary that the original shelter had grown into, now run primarily by Samuel and his children. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the cowboy who had built shelter for strays and changed her life forever. In the spring of 1930, Rose's own health began to fail. She had lived 78 years, which was quite remarkable for the time. Her children wanted her to slow down, to rest, but Rose insisted on staying active, feeding the animals, tending her garden, living fully until the very end. One warm May evening, Rose sat on the porch in the chair that had been Ethan's favorite spot. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the ranch was peaceful and beautiful. All around her were the fruits of the life she and Ethan had built together, the love they had shared, the legacy they had created. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Ethan standing there, young and strong and whole again, smiling at her with that same warmth that had captured her heart 52 years ago. "Time to come home, Rose," he said, extending his hand. "Home," Rose repeated, taking his hand and standing easily, feeling her own youth and strength return. She looked back at the porch and saw her body still sitting there, peaceful and still, a slight smile on her lips. "Is that really it?" "That is really it," Ethan confirmed. "You lived well, my love. Now come. There is so much more to see, and I have been waiting for you." Rose looked at her husband, at the love of her life, and felt complete joy fill her. "Let us go then," she said. "Together." "Always together," Ethan agreed. And hand in hand, Ethan and Rose Cole walked into the sunset, into whatever came next, their love eternal and unbreakable, their story complete. The next morning, Samuel found his mother on the porch, passed peacefully in her sleep with a smile on her face and her hand outstretched as if reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her beside Ethan on the hill, and her headstone read, "Rose Lancaster Cole, 1852–1930. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She fed the strays and sheltered the broken. Her kindness built a legacy of love. The animal sanctuary continued to thrive, run by successive generations of Coles who never forgot the story of how it all began. The original shelter behind the Silver Spur Saloon in Abilene was eventually declared a historical landmark, preserved as a reminder of how small acts of compassion can change the world. Every year on the anniversary of Ethan and Rose's first meeting, the Cole family would gather there, bringing food for the strays that still lived in the area, telling the story to the youngest generation so they would never forget. The story of the woman who fed strays behind the saloon every night and the cowboy who built them a shelter by morning became legend in Texas, told and retold as an example of how love begins with kindness, how small gestures can have enormous impact, and how two people who choose each other, day after day, year after year, can build something truly magnificent. And somewhere beyond the sunset, beyond the veil of this world, Ethan and Rose Cole continued their love story, proving that some bonds are too strong to be broken by something as simple as death, and that true love, real love, the kind that is built on compassion and kindness and daily choice, really does last forever. The Circle C Ranch prospered for decades, and even as the world changed and modernized, the Cole family never forgot their roots. They maintained the animal sanctuary, expanded it even, creating one of the first no-kill shelters in Texas. They treated their workers fairly, paid good wages, and fostered a community based on the values Ethan and Rose had embodied their entire lives. Samuel lived to be 83, passing on his veterinary practice to his own daughter while continuing to tell stories about his parents until his final days. Eleanor and Grace both lived long, happy lives, filling the world with children and grandchildren who carried the Cole name and the Cole values forward. By the time the 20th century drew to a close, there were hundreds of descendants of Ethan and Rose Cole scattered across Texas and beyond. But they all knew the story. They all understood where they came from, what they stood for, who they were meant to be. Because the foundation had been laid so solidly, built on love and kindness, and the simple choice to care about creatures that others had forgotten. And in Abilene, Texas, the old shelter still stood behind what had once been the Silver Spur Saloon, weathered but maintained, a monument to a love story that had started with strays and scraps and had grown into something eternal. People would come from miles around to see it, to hear the story, to remember that in an often harsh and unforgiving world, kindness matters, compassion counts, and love, when it is real and true and built on a foundation of caring, can change absolutely everything. The end.